Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today, we've got a real treat, a topic you suggested, and one that's steeped in history and, well, a bit of Texas swagger. We're talking about the Texas military, brought to you by the fine folks over at Sheba Coffee and Tico. Now, most folks, they know about the U.S. Armed Forces, but Texas does things a little differently, y'all. They've got their own military forces, totally separate from the national structure.
Separate and older.
Oh, that's right. These forces, they actually predate the state of Texas itself.
Going all the way back to 1823.
1923.
Yep, think about that. 13 years before the Republic of Texas even existed.
That's wild. So we're talking even before the Alamo, before all that. Okay, so today, we're going to unpack how this unique military system works, how it came to be, and what it's actually capable of. Are you ready to dive in?
Born ready. Let's do it.
All right, so picture this. Texas, 1823. It ain't even a republic yet, just a territory. And that's when the Texian militia was formed. Talk about forward thinking. What was the driving force behind setting up a militia so early on?
Well, it was a pretty rough and tumble time. You had these early settlers, and they were facing danger from all sides. Native American raids, bandits, you name it. They needed to protect themselves.
Makes sense. Safety in numbers, right?
Exactly. So the Texian militia, that was their answer. Their way to band together and survive shows you just how deeply ingrained the whole idea of self-reliance and defense is in Texas, even way back then.
It's like baked into their DNA.
Pretty much.
Now, this militia, we're not just talking about a bunch of folks with muskets, right? These were the forerunners of the legendary Texas Rangers.
Oh, absolutely. The Rangers, they have a history that's larger than life. And it all traces back to those early days of the Texian militia. They were the lawmen on the frontier, the scouts, the tough guys who kept things somewhat in order.
I can picture it now, those wide-brimmed hats, the horses, the whole 9 yards.
Yep. Classic Texas. But before we go down that rabbit hole of Stetsons and six-shooters.
Right.
We got to stick to the main story here, the military side of things.
Okay, agreed. So let's fast forward a bit. The Texas Revolution kicks off in 1835. Texas is fighting for independence from Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And that Texian militia, well, it grows into the Texian army.
And they even had a Texian navy.
Hold on. A navy? Before they were even officially a country.
It might sound crazy, but think about it. Back then, control of the Gulf of Mexico, that was absolutely vital.
So it wasn't just for show. They really needed it.
Oh, yeah. It was their way to disrupt Mexican supply lines and to protect their own coastline. It was a huge risk, but...
A risk that paid off.
You got it. Texas wins independence, becomes its own republic for almost a decade. And during all that time, they had a full-fledged military. Army, Navy, even their own Texas Marines.
Talk about a power move. But then, in 1846, Texas joins the U.S. What happened to all those soldiers, all those ships? They didn't just, vanish, did they?
Well, it wouldn't make much sense to have two different militaries running around the same state.
Yeah, that'd be kind of chaotic.
So those Texan forces, they got absorbed into the U.S. military. It was a natural transition. But that idea, the idea of Texas having its OWN military force, that never really faded away.
And that brings us to the modern-day Texas military forces. Not one branch, not two, but three. The Texas Army National Guard, the Texas Air National Guard, and the Texas State Guard. That's a lot of acronyms.
It is.
Now, I know the National Guard units, they can be called up by the U.S. government. It's like they have dual citizenship, right? But the State Guard, what's their deal? What's their purpose if the president can just send the National Guard off to, I don't know, Timbuktu?
That's where things get really interesting. The Texas State Guard, they're completely under Texas's control. They can't be federalized, send off on orders from Washington.
So they're like the Texas-only defense force.
Exactly. Think of it this way. A major hurricane slams into Texas. At the same time, there's some national emergency going on, and the Texas National Guard gets deployed overseas. Who's left to help out in Texas?
Ah, I see where you're going with this. The State Guard. They're like the home team, always ready no matter what's happening on the national level.
That's the idea.
But let's be honest. When most folks think about the Texas military, they picture those dramatic rescues during hurricanes. All those helicopters and boats pulling people from rooftops. Is that really all they do? Just disaster relief?
Well, disaster response is a huge part of their mission, for sure. But it's just the tip of the iceberg, really. They do a whole lot more. We're talking counter-drug operations, border security, search and rescue missions, even community outreach programs. It's a pretty long list.
Wow, so they're busy. Okay, let's break down each branch a little more, see what they bring to the table. Starting with the Texas Army National Guard. over 19,000 soldiers. That's a lot of boots on the ground. What kind of firepower are we talking here?
Well, they're not just about ground troops, though they do have plenty of those. We're talking tanks, artillery, engineers, medics. They even have cyber warfare units.
Cyber warfare units. Now that sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It might sound futuristic, but cyber warfare is a very real threat these days. And the Texas Army National Guard, they're training hard to defend against cyber attacks, protect critical infrastructure. It's a whole new kind of battlefront, and Texas is taking it seriously.
Wow, the digital front lines. Okay, so we've covered the ground game. What about up in the air? The Texas Air National Guard, they've got the planes, obviously, but it's all just, flying around.
Nope, they do a lot more than just that. The Texas Air National Guard, they've got fighter jets, sure, but also transport planes, refueling tankers, and specialized units for things like combat communications and reconnaissance.
So they're the eyes in the sky and the helping hand from above.
Exactly. And just like the Army National Guard, they can be deployed by either the state government or the federal government. They've seen action in Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it.
Wow, so they're really a global force, too. Now, this whole dual citizenship thing for the National Guard, I got to admit, it's fascinating. Can you give us, like, a real-world example of how that works in practice, like a time when a Texas National Guard unit got called up by the feds and how that affected the state?
Sure. Let's rewind back to 2005. Hurricane Katrina. Remember that. Thousands of Texas National Guard soldiers were sent to Louisiana to help with the disaster relief efforts.
Katrina, yeah, that was devastating.
It was. Now, here's the thing. This was also right when Texas was dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Rita. So you had this situation where the Texas National Guard was stretched really thin, trying to respond to emergencies both at home and in a neighboring state.
Man, talk about a tough spot. So in that kind of situation, having the Texas State Guard ready to step in, got to be crucial.
Absolutely. The Texas State Guard was able to provide extra support within Texas, which freed up those National Guard units to focus on Louisiana. It really shows how the dual structure of the Texas military can provide flexibility and make sure the state always has resources available no matter what's going on.
It's like a safety net within a safety net.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the Texas State Guard, the force that's purely under Texas's control. What are some of the things they do that might surprise people?
Well, besides that support role we just talked about, they play a big role in training and mentoring new recruits for both the Army and Air National Guard. They also have specialized units for things like search and rescue, medical support, even cybersecurity. They're kind of like the jack of all trades of the Texas military, ready to jump in wherever needed.
Like the utility players of the team. But, let's be real for a second. This whole idea of Texas having its own separate military force, it can seem a little, I don't know, controversial. Like, does Texas really need its own army when there's already a national one?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a debate that's been going on for as long as the Texas military has existed. And there are some strong arguments on both sides.
Well, let's hear them. What are the main points for and against Texas having its own distinct military force?
All right, so on the pro side, you got folks who say it gives Texas an extra layer of protection and independence. It ensures that Texas will always have troops available to respond to emergencies, no matter what's happening on the national level.
So it's all about being prepared, even if the federal government is tied up somewhere else.
Exactly. And then there's the historical argument. Texans, they've always been fiercely independent, right? Going all the way back to fighting for independence from Mexico. They see the Texas military forces as a continuation of that spirit, a symbol of the state's commitment to standing on their own 2 feet and defending themselves.
Makes sense, given Texas's history. But what about the folks who are against it? What are their main criticisms of the Texas military forces?
Well, some people say it's just redundant, a waste of money. They say the National Guard can handle everything the state needs, and having a separate state force is just duplicating things and draining taxpayer dollars.
So from their perspective, it's like paying for 2 sets of the same tools.
Right. And then there's the worry about potential conflicts of interest. Like, what if the state government and the federal government have different priorities or even disagree strongly on something? Could the Texas military forces lead to a situation where you have Texans fighting against other Americans?
Whoa, okay, that takes things to a whole other level. It sounds like there's a lot to consider here. But one thing I've been wondering about is, does having these separate forces actually make a difference in the real world? Like, does it change how Texas responds to emergencies or handles security threats?
That's a great question, and researchers have been studying that for years. There's no easy answer, but some studies have found that states with their own distinct military forces, like Texas, tend to be more self-sufficient and resilient when disasters hit.
Interesting. So it's not just about symbolism. It actually makes them better at handling tough situations. But what about that potential for conflict? Has that ever actually happened in Texas?
Well, there have been times when things got a little tense between the state government and the federal government, especially when it comes to things like immigration and border security. But so far, those disagreements haven't turned into any kind of open conflict.
So it's a delicate balance, that's for sure. But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the people in these forces. Who are the individuals who choose to serve in the Texas military? What motivates them?
That's a great question, and one that often gets overlooked. You see, the men and women who serve in the Texas military, they come from all walks of life. Students, teachers, business owners, healthcare workers. They're a reflection of the diversity of Texas.
But it's not just like the stereotypical image of, cowboys and gun enthusiasts.
Not at all. You'll find people from every background, every corner of the state, and their reasons for serving are just as diverse. Some are drawn to the patriotism, the sense of duty. They want to give back to their community and their state. Others are looking for adventure, a challenge, a chance to learn new skills.
I bet for some it's about family tradition too, carrying on the legacy of those who served before them. That military history runs deep in Texas, right?
You're right. The Texas military has a rich history, and for many, serving is a way to honor that legacy. But it's not just about the past. Lots of young people join the Texas military because they see it as a way to build a better future for themselves. The training and experience they get can open doors to new opportunities in civilian life. Scholarships, job skills, leadership development. It's all part of the package.
So it's not just about serving your state, it's about investing in yourself too.
Exactly. And let's not forget the camaraderie, the sense of purpose that comes with being part of a team. The bonds you form in the Texas military, those often last a lifetime. And the shared experiences, they create a really unique sense of belonging. It's a special kind of community.
It really does sound like being part of the Texas military. It's more than just a job, it's a whole way of life.
Yeah.
But it can't be easy, right? All that dedication, the sacrifice, especially in a state as big as Texas.
You're right. It takes a lot. Many of these folks, they're juggling families, jobs, school. On top of that, they've got drills, training exercises, and the chance of being deployed, like at any moment.
Yeah, I can only imagine the pressure that puts on them and their families. Are there any, support systems in place to help them handle all that?
Oh, definitely. The Texas military, they offer all sorts of support programs, financial assistance, educational benefits, counseling services, family readiness groups, and there are a lot of community organizations that step up too, providing childcare, transportation, even emotional support and career guidance.
It sounds like it really does take a village.
Mm.
But I'm curious, with all the changes in the world, the technology, how warfare is evolving, is the Texas military keeping up? Are they adapting to meet the challenges of, today?
That's the SE question, isn't it? And the answer is yes. They're definitely making a big push to modernize and stay ahead of the curve. We talked about their investments in cyber warfare, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. They're also using new training methods, incorporating all the latest tech, and focusing on developing leaders who can think on their feet and adapt to, well, basically anything.
Smart move. So they're embracing the future, but with all this talk about the Texas military being separate from the U.S. Armed Forces, it's easy to forget that they actually work together sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Texas military has a long history of cooperating with the U.S. military, both here in the U.S. and overseas. Remember Hurricane Katrina? Texas National Guard units were deployed to Louisiana, and they often do joint training exercises with other states, even other countries.
So it's not just Texas going it alone. It's about working together. Right. Like a team effort.
Exactly. And that kind of cooperation is only becoming more important, With the kinds of threats we face today, a lot of them cross borders. So you need everyone on the same page.
We've covered a lot of ground today. The Texian militia, the modern challenges, the structure, their capabilities, even what drives the people who serve. But I got to ask, this whole system, Texas having its own separate military force, is it ultimately a good thing for the state? Or does it create more problems than it solves?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. We talked about the arguments on both sides. It really comes down to your own perspective, what you think is important. State autonomy, fiscal responsibility, national unity, it's a lot to weigh.
It's definitely complicated. But I think we can all agree on one thing. The Texas military, it's a fascinating part of Texas. Their history, their identity. a symbol of their independent spirit, their commitment to doing things their own way, and their willingness to defend what they believe in.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And the story isn't over. It's still being written, shaped by the world around us.
So what are your takeaways from our deep dive into the Texas military? Anything surprise you? Challenge your thinking?
We want to know. Head over to the show notes. There are links to learn even more.
And a big thanks to our sponsors, Sheba Coffee and Tico, for fueling our deep dive with their delicious, sustainably sourced drinks. We couldn't do it without them.
Cheers to that.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.